Welcome to Real Talk in ELT, a podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English.
Okay, that is time.
Okay, ready to go?
Yep.
Okay, so welcome back to another episode of Real Talk in ELT. I'm here with Dorothy Zemach. Is it the last name?
We say Zemach.
Zemach?
Originally it was something else, but I accept any reasonable variation.
Is there an origin story of why we accept any variation?
Well, so I was actually trying to check into a hotel in Israel once, and I gave my name, and he's looking at the book going, yeah, I got nothing. I was like, really? Zemach? Is it maybe under Dorothy? I got nothing. So I handed him my passport, and he looks at it and kind of rolls his eyes, and he goes, you're saying it wrong. And he stopped and drilled me in the pronunciation of my own name until I said it correctly.
No.
Then he found my reservation and checked me. Well, because it was originally Hebrew, and I was saying it wrong. But I'm thinking, for a few generations we've been over there in the U.S. and we just went for Zemach. And if even I say it wrong, how can I get mad if anyone else says it wrong?
How is the? Do you remember the original? Like how it's
more like Zemach. And it's got
okay.
nice on the end, and it's a th instead of a z, and an eh instead of an e. But
okay, well, we'll accept any variation.
Exactly. If you make a good faith effort, I'm fine with that.
Great. Okay, so let me introduce you properly, and then we can dig into it. So, Dorothy is an author, editor, teacher, and teacher trainer in the field of English language teaching, ELT. She taught English, French, and Japanese for over 20 years in Asia, Africa, and the US. I actually did watch a webinar on YouTube. I forget who you gave it to. It was about teaching in Japan. Well, no, you were teaching English in Japan, and then you came back to the US, and you were
I was
teach
the service
Japanese.
Yeah. That I think
it's an interesting story.
I remember that talk. It was, can you teach English if you're not fluent?
Yes.
And my answer is, well, yes and no. And there are things you can teach and things you'll struggle with. But in a perfect world, of course, you would be a master of whatever you're teaching. But that isn't always the case.
Yeah.
And I know there have been real strides made for non-native teachers of English who are fluent.
Correct.
But I think there is also room for non-native teachers of English who are pretty good, or who are at a certain level but know how to study and know how to learn. And if we shut those teachers out, we leave a lot of students with nothing at all. So.
It's an interesting perspective, because here, oh God, we'll have to get through your bio at some point. But
Okay.
do you see how it goes? But it is an interesting point, because here in Brazil, well, I've been here for 12 years, and kind of this is the community that primarily I work in. And here they do have a large, I don't want to say discrimination, but there is a really big negative connotation or negative influence when we say, oh, I'm not C1 or C2 proficient in English, and people are very judgmental.
About Brazil, when I was there for, I think, about 6 weeks of language teacher training through the U.S. State Department, including a talk at TESL, which is a terrific organization and really professional. But I noticed that all of the talks are in English. And I asked the State Department person I worked with, I said, I wonder why there are no presentations in Portuguese. And she said, yeah, that's kind of the culture of TESL, that if your English isn't good enough to do it only in English, you shouldn't come. Because we had been out in smaller, more rural parts of Brazil working with, mid-career teachers whose own English needed a boost. But if they're intimidated to come to the national conference, then how do they get better? I mean, they're kind of shut out of the professional development of their own country. And somebody saying, well, if you have it in Portuguese, then the expats can't come. It's like, yeah, but there's far fewer Americans and Brits than there are Brazilians. So if you had bilingual presentations, some in Portuguese and some in English, and maybe somewhere you want to contrast the language, or a subset of somebody who wants to talk in Spanish, as long as there's an audience for that.
Right. It has changed. It has changed, because I volunteer on the TESL Business English Special Interest Group Board.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I've been part of the organization for quite a few years now, and it has changed.
Oh,
It's
good.
going in the right direction. So maybe
Yeah.
your comments made an influence, because now you can, at the international conference, you are welcome to submit proposals in Portuguese, and we have a newsletter that comes out called Echoes, and you're
Hmm.
allowed to submit any article in Portuguese or in English. So
Yeah. Yeah.
serves,
I
yeah.
think that's great because if you've been pressed into the teaching of English and your own English isn't fluent, well, where do you get better? First of all, where do you get better at English? But where do you get better at teaching?
Right.
And you isn't it fair to help those people become better teachers,
Mm-hmm.
even if, maybe they wouldn't get a TOEFL score that would get them into a graduate degree
Mm-hmm.
program. I mean, there's a lot along the way,
Right.
right?
Right. Okay, so let's go
Anyway,
back.
back to the
Okay.
bio. Keep
Back to
going.
the
Let's see what else
bio.
went on.
Okay, you have an MA in TESL from the School for International Training in Vermont. Originally, are you from Vermont, or are you East Coast or
No,
West
no.
Coast? Where are you from?
Yeah.
All
I mean, I
over.
was born in California. I did some time on the East Coast. I spent high school in New Mexico, college in Oregon. I
Oh, you've
time
gone.
overseas.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Got it.
Here and
Okay.
there, here and there.
She currently writes and edits English language teaching materials and textbooks and conducts teacher training workshops. Her areas of specialty and interest include teaching writing, teaching reading, business English, academic English, testing, and humor. It's sometimes a dry humor too that comes out in your presentations, which I fully appreciate. She's a frequent plenary speaker at international conferences and does online webinars and trainings as well. So welcome officially.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for tracking me down however you did.
Oh, actually, it was through a couple people. I had posted something on Instagram of people that you wanted to have a chat on the podcast, and your name was suggested. And then, yeah, here you are.
Here I am. Here I am.
So
And congratulations for finding me on Instagram because I keep forgetting I have an Instagram and it's like, oh, I should put up a picture of something, shouldn't I? But
No.
I kind of have only the mental space for one piece of social media. So I'm active on Facebook. I have a LinkedIn account. I
Yeah.
try to remember to go and check it, but
I put
nothing against
reminders on my
Instagram,
phone
nothing
sometimes.
against
So.
LinkedIn, nothing. Well, something against Twitter, but let's park that. But I just don't have time to be active in too many different places.
Yeah, well, I tracked you down, and actually, we'll share your Instagram account, but more.
So right, if anyone's welcome to follow me,
If
but I
anybody
might
wants
not
to
be
get in
very
touch,
active. Yeah,
just be patient because it might take. She doesn't check it frequently.
exactly.
But you do have a website which is fantastic, and it has all the publications. I've been on it and I've looked around, so I think it's easiest through the email and website. But the reason I did want to have you on because a few of the people that had recommended that I had a chat with you went to the 2018 plenary talk at IATEFL.
Ah, yes.
And I think you poked a few bears while you were there. And I love this.
Well, although I did keep saying, and I will still say, I am not anti-publisher. I mean, I
You
work
are
for
a publisher, right?
right? And I am a publisher myself, and I still write for the big traditional publishers. But this sort of shift of taking the control of writing away from authors and putting it in the hands of marketing teams, I don't know if that always creates the best materials.
Right. So for those of you who haven't seen it, there is on the IATEFL website, there's the plenary talk, the full plenary talk, and this is kind of where I'm going to ask questions from. So if you want to,
And
I would
it's on
say
YouTube
maybe
as well. If you put Dorothy Zemach, IATEFL, I think it was 2018, then it will come up. And it's IATEFL requires you to leave your plenary up on YouTube for a year, and after that, it is the presenter's choice whether it stays up or comes down. And I said, leave it up. So.
I actually really appreciate it because I think it's important that we don't. Well, sometimes people say things and then times change and then they regret what they say and they're, I'm going to be canceled or I'm going to have a black cloud over me, something along those lines, right?
I had a little canceling from publishers over that. And yet, at a certain point, you believe what you believe. And I still stand behind what I said.
Yeah, and so I think that it's good, though, to have, that's half of the reason I have a YouTube channel is to go back and be like, Okay, so I thought that at the moment because I was
Hmm.
working with a certain set of information. And now this is why I wanted to follow up with you on it. So you mentioned that the first question that I had for you, you mentioned that publishers were moving towards digital products and LMS platforms, and this had a significant consequences for the writers, right? So you had huge impacts.
Yeah. And I think they tried to move before they were ready. Pearson went first in 2013, where they sent all us authors a letter saying that they were moving beyond publishing to an agile and outcome-driven function. And we're all like, what? And they were saying,
What
well, we
exactly
don't,
does that
no
mean?
more
Okay.
paper textbooks. It's all going to be digital. And I mean, a lot of us teach in areas of the world where internet connectivity is still an issue. I mean, I do a lot in the Middle East and North Africa, and they can't go digital only. I mean, I just come from Yemen, which had nightly rolling power blackouts. We couldn't have all of our textbook materials online. How could we study? There are high schools in the U.S. that don't have internet access in classrooms. I mean, and there are certainly homes in the U.S. where students don't have connectivity, and it's like we
Well,
can't
even if they do have
get rid of
connectivity,
paper.
sometimes it's
Yeah,
like mobile connectivity, which is much different if you have a screen and a place to
right.
sit.
Well,
So
and
it's
and Pearson
beyond.
did a lot of studies on U.S. campuses where they would ask students, how many of you own a smartphone? How many of you own a laptop? And no surprise, everybody owned a smartphone and a laptop. But that doesn't mean that's how they want to learn. So I remember my own son calling me from his sophomore year at college at a pretty expensive school. And he said, Mom, I don't know what to do about my books because I can buy the paper ones or I can rent a digital one that's $10 cheaper. And he's asking me because I'm going to pay for it. And so I said, well, which is easier to learn from? And he said, oh, the paper. I said, well, let's not send you to an expensive school and then save $10 on one of the most important tools there. Get what's easiest for you to learn from. But this same kid, his last year of college, when he was calling less often because he was older, at one point he said something to me about how he hadn't bought a book in over a year. And I went, oh, really? Would you like to explain why you're not buying the books for your classes? And he said, well, our professors tell us not to buy the books. They tell us they're too expensive and to go check them out of the library. And I said, okay, fair enough. But you live off campus. You cannot tell me when you do your studying at 2 a.m. because you've got class at 9 that you are going over to a closed library and somehow getting that book. How do you get your materials? And he said, well, some people who are in the same class, if they're in the same apartment building or dormitory, buy one book and share it amongst themselves. He said, some people get third world books. And I said, what are those? He said, it's the same book, but it's printed on cheap paper, so it costs less. And I said, how do you get those? And he said, I don't know. I know people who do that, but I have not personally figured it out. And I said, okay, what do you do? And he said, well, for example, his economics book, he said, I found the old edition online as a PDF for free. So I said, is that a pirated copy? And, and he thinks for a bit and he goes, well, no, because it's an old edition. And he
Oh,
thinks a bit more. And of course, Mom's a textbook writer, so he knows where this is going. He
right.
thinks a bit more and he goes, or maybe it is pirated because it shouldn't be online in the first place. And I said, well, that would be correct. And then he kind of goes, well, I'm not going to spend $180 on a book I don't want for a class I don't want that lasts 16 weeks that I can't resell. And I thought, dude, take the old edition pirate. I mean, as books get more and more expensive, people turn to pirating more and more. And yet, every time they pirate books, costs go up, right?
Right.
And so when he told me that, and I was thinking, okay, so it's a required class. You don't necessarily want the class. You're not going to keep the book, and you can't resell it. What's the breaking point? So the University of Oregon is near my house. It's maybe a 10-minute walk. And sometimes when I feel like getting out of the house, I go down to the law school which has a nice library and tables spread out, and nobody questions my ID or why I'm there.
Just
And they have a nice cafe.
walk.
And so I get my coffee and I go hang out in the law school library, and people assume I'm a lawyer or something. But it's students, right, who work the cafe. And so if it's not busy, I spent several months just asking them one by one, at what price point do you buy a book without thinking about it? And at what point do you begin thinking, I wonder if I can get it out of the library or use my friends, or if I should steal an online copy? And of course, these are law students, so I think they're going towards more money than many English teachers and English students are going to. So their price point is probably higher, and they're also sitting in the United States. But for them, it was about $50, and some of them up to $100. Over $100, they're not going to buy that book.
And that's quite low for I mean, I went to the I am from the U.S.
Yeah.
and I went to university in the U.S. and my books were $500 at some point.
So at that price point, and there were plenty of students, future lawyers, who would say they didn't take some classes because the books were too expensive, which is kind of a shame. And then I asked them, supposing you could pay one price, or I said, supposing like money is no object, and you have all the money in the world and you don't have to worry about that, would you rather have a digital copy or a paper copy? Because I'm thinking of my son saying it's easier to study on paper. And that always got people going, well, they're like, well, the paper is easier to study from and it's easier to read, but they're so heavy. And the digital is easier to take with you if you go to a friend's house or bring to class. And so I said, well, what if you could pay one price and you got both editions? That you just pay one price, not double price, but you pay one price and you got both the paper and the digital. And they all went, oh, that would be so perfect if only the technology existed. I think, well, of course the technology
exists, right?
Amazon used to have that with their self-publishing. You could tick a box, and then anyone who bought the paperback could get the ebook for whatever price you set it at, including free or 99 cents. And they took that away from us. So somehow they were losing money on it, or
well, it's
but
interesting
I was mad about that, because I thought that was a really nice
feature. It's interesting because it's like, well, the demand from the students, from the people that are actually using the materials, and from, I'm assuming, from the teachers too, that are actually implementing the classes and teaching, we would like to have both options, because sometimes paper is better and sometimes digital is easier.
Right.
And so
I know that when I'm if I know what I'm looking for, if I have a book and I know exactly, I want to know, the capital of Australia, I can, on a digital book, it's easier to search because I can go into the search bar, type capital of Australia or capital or Canberra if I need to read about Canberra. But where paper is better is if I've been studying something long and dense and I know there's something I need to go back to and I can't search for it because I have no words. There was something, I know it was about a page after that graph, and there was something that I didn't quite get, but I knew I had to come back for it. I can't search for it because I have no words to type into the search bar, but visually I know where it is. And if I open my book, I can go back and find it. Visually, you can also flip through paper a lot faster than you can flip through something digital. So there's times when a digital search is better. There's times when a physical paper search is better. And I worry, I mean, just in the last 6-9 months, paper costs have shot up around the world. And all of the print on demand publishing places are telling us that we're going to have to raise our prices because paper costs more. There's a publisher I know that has decided on a new edition of a course book series to go from 10 units down to 8 units because they can't afford the paper to make 10 units at a price that teachers can still pay. So is this supply chain? Is it COVID? Is it war in Ukraine? Is it climate change? Or is it all of those? I don't know if the price of paper is going to come down again. Right. I don't know if people will finally turn to hemp farming and make paper out of grass or something. I don't know if paper costs will come down or if we'll be sort of pushed on to digital as consumers without much choice. I certainly see that happening with newspapers in the US. They stopped our Saturday delivery of our daily paper. We can go online. I'm thinking, I don't curl up when I'm relaxing with a cup of coffee and a computer screen. The computer screen is my work. But there are times when I want to be not on the computer screen. But the paper keeps getting thinner and thinner and thinner as advertisers leave, and so it's hard to make predictions. Certainly, digital is here to stay, but
But do you
I
see the
don't think that
publishers?
means that paper is certainly not gone yet.
Yet, yeah, I'm thinking is, do you see the publishers, because you're in the industry, you work with it,
Yeah.
you see the trends? I mean, we've given some anecdotal information about preferences from students and teachers, and certainly from
Mhm.
working in the industry. But do you see publishers thinking to themselves in terms of, well, what can we offer as like this a hybrid between here's your digital resources and here's your paper
Yeah.
resources?
And
Because
I think for a long time they were hoping that people would pay an enormous amount of money and just go into the LMS. And there was a period, I hope the publishers have stopped doing this. I mean, they don't always share their financial plans with me, where they thought that, for example, if you were Cengage or Nat Geo or whoever they are now, that if you built a beautiful LMS, then a high school or a language institute in Brazil would choose to get all of its books inside that LMS, and they would just be in the world of your company. And what all of the different publishers discovered to their astonishment was that no language institute or high school or university works that way. A teacher might want a Pearson book for that class and an Oxford book for that class and a Cambridge book for that class and their own materials for another class. And they'd like all their materials to work on the same system, like to all be on Blackboard or Canvas or something. So companies that invested really millions of dollars in an LMS that they hoped would be exclusive and make people think, well, I've got to only use Macmillan books now because they've got this beautiful system. And teachers and institutes just didn't do that. And you don't, and for a teacher, you don't want to have to learn a completely new system for every book, for every publisher, for every class,
practicality, right? This is not
right?
practical for teachers to have to train and to understand how we can use all
Right,
the different
right.
elements. It has to be
And there are universities that have their, that are everyone's using Blackboard or something, and they
right.
on the teachers go there, and the grades go there, and the course syllabi go there. So you'd want your course book to go into that world. You wouldn't want to pull teachers out into some commercial world. So they're going to have to figure out how it is that people would actually like to teach and learn.
Do you think that this is something that has been heavily influenced, like because you did talk about how did you put it, non-educators making decisions about, and so
Well,
is this
as
still quite?
on the brink of this sort of shift as
Mm,
digital came in and people could tell there was going to be a change,
right.
right? This is pre-pandemic, everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be a change in the way things happen. And of course, the publishers are rightly concerned about making money.
Right.
And
They're businesses. They have to be profitable.
right. And they're not hugely profitable businesses either. I mean, it's not like the publishers are rolling in money and starving poor authors. Is their margins are pretty slim. So if they don't make money on a book, they can't afford to keep making that book. But I think they panicked and they thought, oh my God, financial havoc is coming. We need people who are skilled in business, and we need people who are skilled in marketing. And those people are not English teachers. And we saw that first come through with marketing departments. And when I started writing materials, pretty much any sales rep you encountered was a former teacher. And maybe they liked it, maybe they didn't, but they'd had at least a few years in the classroom. So if you're a teacher talking to that person, you could say, I've got this intermediate class and they're not ready to go on, and yet they've done everything I have at this level. And the sales rep would know what you were talking about and say, oh, here's a great book for the intermediate plateau because it's fresh material, but it's recycling all this language and we'll get them nicely prepared for the next stage. But if you're saying that to somebody who doesn't come from education, all they can do is open the catalog and say, well, this book says it's intermediate. Why don't you use that one? I remember talking with somebody who billed himself at TESL as the new complete top boss at Pearson. And I can tell you this story because Spoiler alert, he's no longer there. I don't think he lasted a year. And they had an author party for Pearson authors, and we were there. And probably, I don't know how famous she is in Brazil, but in North America, certainly one of the best known Pearson authors is Betty Azar, whose grammar books.
Oh yes,
So,
she's known here. Yes.
so Betty Azar is there, and the guy is giving his talk, and he says, if any of you have any concerns whatsoever about the company and the way things are run, talk to me. It's like, wow. So I went up to him after his talk and I said, did you mean now or did you mean in an email? And he's like, oh, now is fine. I said, well, grab a drink and come on over to our table. He's like, oh, I don't need a drink. He's like, oh, you will. So he came and he sat down with us, and I introduced Betty Azar, and clearly the name meant nothing to him. So
which is kind of the first sign, right? If you don't even
right,
know
it's like,
who are
okay,
the people in the industry, right?
So we're talking about, and I talked about this, move to all digital, and how like the editors that we trusted had all been laid off, and various problems. And he listened, and he said quite fairly that he was new, and he's not necessarily responsible for the problems that came before him, but he's going to work for. And he kept talking about where I came from, we did this in business, and where I came from, we did this in business. And so finally I asked, where did you come from? And I was hoping he'd say, I don't know, trade publishing or academic publishing or Houghton Mifflin or something. But he kind of smiled and he says, aerospace engineering.
Oh. Well, it's a whole different area.
And Betty said very, very quietly and politely, and she said, books are not widgets. You don't sell a book the way you sell other products, at their relationships. And he said, oh yeah, he had just learned in the past month or so that people might see books at a conference in March, like TESL, but then not order that book until July or August. And we're like, right, because the school year starts in September for us. And if it took you several months to learn this, I don't know how long it's going to take you to get up to speed on books.
Yeah, the learning curve. Right?
And in a year he was gone, and I was not surprised. And he was, a smart man who meant well, but he didn't come in with publishing. I think you need either publishing experience or education experience, but preferably both. Most teachers don't write their own books, but they all write their own materials. So even if they don't write professional quality or publishable quality materials, they certainly write materials that work in class. So that makes them excellent judges of when something works and when it doesn't. So if they take a beautiful looking book into class and they try to teach out of it and it doesn't work, they will never come back to that book. It has to work. So when I have an editor and we're going over what's working or not working on my pages, it's nice if the person has at least spent a year or two in the classroom, so we're speaking the same language. So, occasionally I'm told to change something and I'm wrong and I should change it. Occasionally I'm told to change something and I'm right and I shouldn't. But I want to be able to have that conversation with someone who understands me. Yeah, probably my most successful series of books that I've written in terms of both sales and personal satisfaction is these writing books that I did for Macmillan. The first thing I wrote, and it's now in its third edition, fourth edition.
It's a series too. There's a few of them, right? There's
four now, yeah, right? Mm-hmm. We started with one, and then it went to two, mm-hmm. and eventually we got out to four. Although some of them I had to really fight to get written. And there was a time before the current edition where it was a little office in Hong Kong was going to be in charge of the new edition, and they said, let's do a new edition. And I said, oh, fantastic. And so I went through all the books and marked things that needed to change or be updated, or where I know more about writing now and I would do things differently. And I think we were talking about the paragraphs book, and I said, this whole unit, just not that great. This whole unit should come out. I'd like to replace it with something on graphs and charts because we need more visual information. And so we're doing fine. And so I turn over all my changes. was before any contracts had been signed. And then the editor said, okay, looking good, take out one more unit and replace it with something else. And I said, well, why? And she said, oh, because we need, 60% change or 80% change. And I said, well, we have that. It's just, it's not so much whole units coming out. It's like every exercise has been strengthened. So
Right.
instead of the exercises being unconnected sentences, the exercises are now all on the unit topic and they flow as a paragraph. And it's a subtle thing, but it's going to make students better writers. And she said, yeah, but we need to have this many units that are different. And I couldn't shake her from that. And I said, but there's no reason to change a unit that works, that teachers like, that students like, that works, just to have something different. So we kind of parked that, but I was feeling a little, I mean, I could, there's more than one way to write a unit, but I wasn't too happy about that. And then I mentioned in passing, I said, one thing I really like about this series is that every unit doesn't have to have the same number of pages. They're all the same number of hours to teach, but I mean, some unit might have a grammar chart. Some unit might have an exercise with a lot of lines to write on, or something that will take up more page real estate than another unit. And she goes, oh, well, we'll have to change that. And I said, no, we won't. We'll have to keep the units equal in terms of time it takes to teach them, because teachers get sort of a rhythm of how many, maybe a little bit longer or shorter for unit 1 or 12, but mostly they want units that are about the same amount of hours of classroom instruction,
Right,
and create
right.
about the same number of hours of homework coming back to them, so they can plan their lives. But whether that takes 5 pages or 6, I said, I don't think most teachers notice, or they certainly don't care, but they're not counting up going, wait a minute, there was 7 pages in unit 8, but there's 6 pages in unit 9. Why is this? And she said, well, we'll just make a sort of a standard template. And I said, no, no, I don't want a standard template, because when you're teaching different things, you teach them in different ways. And some of our writing modes have a natural grammar focus. Others don't. Others have a much more organizational focus, or we're doing something else, or I want to work on punctuation here, and we don't have functions to teach, so I can put punctuation in here. I don't want it to be the same. And then they lost funding and dropped the whole revision. And I thought, well, kind of sad, but kind of relieved, because I wasn't sure I was okay with those changes.
You were putting your name on something that, again, it's trying to become this
that had been good. So I
it's
don't
like
want to make
cookie
it
cutter,
worse.
right? And they wanted to make it like a, yeah.
So then the series just hung out, doing its thing, being good, being old, getting older. And they contact me again and say, we'd like to do a new edition of the book. Unfortunately, we don't have much time. And I said, what does that mean? Normally to revise a book would take me, I mean, with a fast publisher like Macmillan, I would say 2 to 4 months to do a revision if you've got a nice solid structure to begin with. And they said, well, I actually had 2 weeks for all 4 books.
Oh my God.
And I was about to say no when I thought, well, wait a minute.
I've already done the work.
I've already done a lot of the work,
Right.
which of course I had saved. I said, but that's no time for them either. Nobody can push back on these things because there's no time.
Right.
So I asked who my editor was, and it wasn't somebody I knew, but we emailed back and forth. And I thought, oh, she sounds very reasonable and very smart. And I said, I'll do it. I don't think I slept for 2 weeks. And I do have co-authors who are, sending in some pieces of things, and I had already done some replacement units already for this one book, and so I could slot all that in. And I'd already marked up all the books of what needed to be updated. If there's something that references 2008, we know that needs to become more modern. So I'd done a lot of the work, but sure enough, they were like, yeah, all we need is it like to be 10% different and for it to be correct. And so I love the new editions, but
that's wonderful.
they do have different numbers of pages per unit sometimes, depending on what we need to teach.
Well, but
if that were a new series, if I were coming to Macmillan saying, hey, I have a great idea for a 4-level writing series, I would never be allowed to do that.
See, and that's the thing. So sometimes, and I kind of want to transition because you're making me think of something else. But
Hmm.
if we're looking at books as educators, we really want something that actually works in the classroom. I don't care the pages. I don't care the font or if it's necessarily even if it's beautiful. I just need something that serves a purpose.
Yeah.
That
Well, when
being,
I was publishing my own stuff, I had to, I mean, some of the books that I published have artwork in them, have photographs. And I had to make the decision, do we go color or black and white? And either is possible. I mean, I just press a button. But if I go color, the books are a lot more expensive. And I thought, I can't, I cannot come close to the artwork of National Geographic, with the fabulous
no,
photos
that's
and
next
professional
level,
designers.
right?
And I can't challenge that. But I can go after a different market. I can go after classes that have less money and students that have less money and teachers that have less money who would still like a photograph to tell them what it is that we're talking about here. But if making it black and white knocks $10 off the cover price of the book, then we'll do that.
But also, teachers are very creative. If they want, they can bring their own pictures to class, or they can
They can. They can.
realia or
Yeah.
something. They can, set the
Or the
context.
digital
Yeah.
version has color because that's not a price image. But as publishers have moved more towards only doing kind of 5 and 6 level course books that also have tests and a workbook and a teacher's guide and whatnot, what they've dropped are the little sort of one-offs, like an upper intermediate conversation prompts for Latin Americans. So that kind of niche book has been dropped because it's just not profitable enough for them. But some people do still want those books. So that's the area where I see, so independent authors, who just write their own stuff, or tiny publishers like me, that's the area that we're moving into, is all those kind of quirky, less series oriented books that big publishers don't want to do anymore. Professional development books, that don't sell that much, but are still important.
I
The
went.
most recent
Yeah.
self-development, professional development book that I did was something that had gone out of print, and someone passed me, probably illegally, a Word document of all the chapters, through Facebook Messenger, and I read it and I thought, this is a great book. And so I tracked the author down on Facebook, and I said, can I make your book be a book again? Because,
Yeah.
and are we going to sell a lot of copies? Probably not, but it's a really good book and nobody can read it if it doesn't exist.
Right. And it's interesting that you say that because, well, we'll go in two directions here. The last international conference for breast TESL was last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I went around because I primarily work with business English, and I went around to all the publishers, and there's nothing. There's the big, right? So there's nothing new coming out. They have their core, the series, right, which is really for kind of pre-service people or people
Yeah.
who don't, but there's nothing new coming out in business English. And I said that's such a pity. That's such a shame.
Can I
Because
tell you my heartbreaking story of my business series?
yes, please.
We had a two level series that we did back in the old days when publishers would still take authors with them around on research trips. So I spent a week or 2 weeks in Japan visiting classrooms, talking to teachers, looking at what they're using, talking with my editor every day about why this works and why this doesn't work and whatnot. And that got me my lower level writing book, which I'd fought for 5 years to get because I wanted something based on accuracy. And they're like, oh, teachers don't want anything based on accuracy. I was thinking, oh, I think they do. So I won that for the writing book, and the also was the business English book. And we did, I mean, it's a book 1 and a book 2, but not so much different levels as a pre-service for a pre-work for students at university, and something for students who had jobs. And for me, the selling points of both of those, which are now gone, for the pre work students, and we were watching them use textbooks from other publishers, and nobody had any motivation. They were just sitting there. It's like, well, what do you think of Coca-Cola? And the students like, well, I know this logo, it's Sony, it's good, but they kind of don't care. And I said, well, of course they don't care, because they have nothing to pin it on. And I said, well, I would like to do what was done to me as a student of French. Let them make their own company. what I did as a French student is we made our own person and character and story. So in Unit
Oh, I
1, they
did that as
created,
well in French. Actually,
yeah,
we
yeah,
created our own city. We had our own jobs.
exactly. And
Yeah,
you get really invested in it, don't
I
you?
did. I was
And you
Colette,
care.
the bar owner.
Right, right, right. I was Jean-Jacques Labime, a manic depressive who was also an alcoholic. Very French, right?
Okay, good.
So in Unit 1, they created a company, they gave it a head office, they chose a product, and they made a business card, and they practiced swapping their business card. Unit 2, they're designing a building, or so. Unit 3, they choose a worker and a personality and a schedule. And when I did this in Japan with my own trainees for Sumitomo Electric, they were amazingly creative. There was someone who was doing bottled drinking water out of the very polluted lake that was by our factory. Somebody else set his company in ancient Egypt, and they designed pyramids. And he had his 11-year-old and 10-year-old kids draw his pictures for him, because they had to bring in pictures of their office plans. So he had his kids doing his in crayon. Somebody else did ski equipment. Somebody else did fine handmade watches. And then, but after they've gone through a number of units, they could actually do very loosely scripted phone calls and pitch products to each other. There was this wonderful call between the guy who did the ski wear and the man whose company designed pyramids, where the sportswear guy was revealing that actually it turns out the afterlife is very cold. But because the pyramids are in Egypt, nobody's got any outerwear. They don't have jackets. They don't have gloves, scarves, and mittens. And he was able to sell his, ski equipment
To go into the sarcophaguses for the afterlife.
exactly. So the mummies in the afterlife wouldn't be cold. And they had such a good time, and it was so motivating. And so we built that in. So the whole unit followed a story. There was a girl who's come to a new company, and there's two companies doing business with each other. So there's a storyline, but then the project page of each unit took you to where you would do your own company and your own stuff and interact with other students. Book 2, which is for in-work students, there are 12 units, so we did 12 months of a calendar year of a new hire. So Unit 1, she comes to the company, she introduces herself formally and casually. Unit 2, she's learning their mission statement, products, and whatnot. Unit 4, she takes a business trip, and Unit 5, she writes it up, and by the time she gets around to Unit 11, she's having a performance review and choosing appropriate and inappropriate holiday gifts for clients and whatnot. So when they elected to do a new edition of this, they said, well, obviously the project has to go. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, it just that you could have project pages, but you couldn't connect them one to another. And we fought so hard on that. And then in book 2, they said we could still have those unit topics, but we could not have a storyline. And when I asked why not, they said it was because they were making it international and Europeans don't like stories. I said,
Oh, that's news to me. Okay.
really? Because I read a lot. I'm sure I read a lot of literature in class that came from in college, that came from Europe. I remember they had some books, and we fought really hard. They wouldn't budge, and my co-author and I said, then we back out. We don't want to do a new edition. Let's just let it die here. And they said, yeah, check your contract, because if you don't do the writing, we will hire someone else to do the writing. Oh, they're also lowering our royalties. So we'll still lower your royalties. We'll hire someone else to write the new portions of the book, and we'll deduct their fee from your royalties. And you'll have no control over anything. So in the end,
kind of backed into a corner then. So it's
right. So we did it, and I said, but I want you, and the new international edition was going to be in British English, and I said that's fine. I don't care, American or British English. So I said, can we leave the American English edition, which would sell into Japan and also Latin America? Can we leave that the way it is? And they said, absolutely. Promise that will not go out of print. And it immediately went out of print. When I went through Latin America, Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, every time I met a sales rep, I'd say, hey, how about get ready for business? They'd never heard of the book. And I'd say, well, can we look it up on the website? And I'd pitch it to them, and they would be told they couldn't order it in Latin America. So, I mean, the British English edition exists, sort of. I mean, it sells a little. I guess it's not a terrible book, but it's not as good as it was. And I don't know that it's better than its competitors. It's certainly not different
Yeah.
from its competitors. If you're already happily using a nice Oxford book, would you change to this one? You could, but there's no compelling reason. Whereas a student project or a storyline that people connect to, I thought that's a reason that these materials will work in class. But I could never have that conversation with a former teacher or somebody from education. When I talk to teachers and I say, "Oh, and there's a storyline," everyone's like, "Oh, really? That sounds great." Like, right, a teacher gets it.
Yeah, so then the second question before we got distracted on the business English was kind of now, because post pandemic we see lots of people publishing their own, their self publishing, and do you see? I don't know if you've seen this. I've seen some here. It's still very novel in Brazil that people are producing their own books.
Yeah.
Do you see them as actually filling this need
Yeah.
though?
Yeah.
Because at the
Well,
same
often,
time,
often when a teacher writes his or her own materials, it's because they can't find what they need.
okay, but
So
then
they're looking
what
for
about the
something.
quality too?
Well, I mean,
So
I'm a little bit biased in favor of because, and I teach
okay,
a class in self-publishing for ELT professionals every summer.
okay,
And the point I make is that it's not just self-publishing, it's self-publishing. So you are still responsible for getting a professional cover and a book designer if you're doing a paperback and hiring an editor and hiring a proofreader. But you can do those things. And it's an expense, yes, but it's an expense you pay once. And then how much you make per book, you're not sharing with anybody. That's yours. So as long, I mean, if you just take your worksheets and throw them up into a book format, Amazon won't stop you. But I don't think they'll sell well over time because people will try them out and think this isn't any good, and they'll move on. Teachers talk, students talk.
yeah. But do
I
you, but do you
I,
do
I
you
do
think?
I do see bad material self-published all the time, but
Yeah,
I kind of don't care because
because
they're not going to last.
yeah,
They're
it's
not going to last.
filling something. But I also do see that because, for example, business English, we can't really find any new materials, and we can't find things that are very specific. I know that there was a series. A friend of mine wrote Evan Friendo. He wrote the English for accounting, and so they have
Yeah,
some niche things. But even those have kind of gone out, and those weren't self-published; those were published by big
yeah, yeah, yeah,
publishers.
yeah.
But
But
you can't
but
really
something
find
like English
anything.
for accounting could certainly be self-published by somebody who really
And
knew that field. So interestingly, so I had these two main, I
hmm,
call my little cheap series. One is on 50 ways to teach X, 50 ways to teach reading, speaking, writing, like the kind of advice you'd get in a teacher's book, but not tied to any course or textbook. And my most recent title was 50 Ways to Teach Business English. And coincidentally, for my self-study line, which I had thought was unexpandable, because the teacher one, we also have teach young learners and teach teenagers and be a greener teacher and teach life skills. I mean, that can kind of keep expanding. But for learners, we had, reading, writing, grammar, vocabulary, listening. And I thought that's kind of it. No, you don't have a self-study book for being a young learner. And someone pitched to me, how about 50 ways to practice being business English? And I thought, well, that's actually not a bad idea. So we published that in the last 4 or 5 days, I think. So
oh,
hot
this is
off the
like
press,
hot off the presses. This is
hot off the presses. The
okay.
business English book we did December 5th. I remember that one because my
Hmm.
mother's birthday. And the student one 4 or 5 days ago, it sort of literally just went up there.
Okay.
So we will see how that does.
No, but I think it's interesting because during the pandemic, everything went online, right? So everything went digital, and then people started creating. There was lots. It was a boom in content creation,
Yeah.
including materials, but then also people self-publishing books. So it was interesting to see. Oh, okay. So maybe this is a new trend that we're going to have lots of self-publishers, small authors doing very niche down
Yeah.
specific books that serve very, very specific purposes.
Yeah, we were, I like to think, first to market during the pandemic. We, meaning my publishing company and my author, with how to teach on Zoom for complete beginners. So people who are like, I don't have an account, I don't really use email, but for teachers, not for business people. So we got that book out, sold massively well, of course, during the beginning of the pandemic. Not just for English teachers, but any kind of teacher. But I was looking at who is our competition. And our strongest competition was a book with a very beautiful cover, but not really written by a human. It was clear. It was a kind of a cut and paste of, I found web pages from other people's articles and university, you know, kind of introductions. And there were things that looked like they'd been run through Google Translate. And it was just sort of stapled together. And after a while, you could see that book getting a bunch of terrible reviews. And someone's like, this doesn't even sound like it's in English. So I think the next wave in quote unquote self-publishing is going to be people using chat GPT to sort of AI create texts, because it's a way to get content up there quickly. And that's going to be competition for someone who is a solid classroom teacher who has something meaningful to say. And it kind of comes down to the consumer. I mean, most online sites will let you read the first 10 or 15% of a book for free and check it out. And you have to think, even if I'm only paying $1, is this actually worth $1? You know, is it real content from a real teacher? But it's, you know,
Do you think that the content that, because I don't know if you've played with Chat GPT, I've been playing with it.
a little. I mean, I can see some fantastic classroom uses for it, where you can generate stuff. Students could come up with a situation, you could generate a text and have them improve it for actual materials. Like I was just talking this morning in a group of ELT writers, and someone said he'd asked it to write an essay about Shakespeare's Othello, and Chat GPT said that you know, kind of Ophelia lives and they patch at their problems. It's like, which
Oh no.
did not actually happen. And it's like, you know, there are racial tensions, but you know, it's all solved at the end, and it's doing its best, but it's not perfect. So if you are an intelligent materials writer and an experienced teacher, and you get a text generated by AI, which you then go in and fix, could be a wonderful time saver. But it would take a teacher to do that. You could certainly have someone who doesn't even speak English, who's like, you know what, I throw this in, I get out something that looks like a book, I'm throwing it up on Amazon, and maybe I'll make $500 before they close my account down. So I think that's coming too. It hasn't hit yet, but in the next 4 or 5 months, I think we're going to have a rash of books on nonfiction topics that, you know, how to invest in cryptocurrency, that was, you know, not written by a human and not worth anything.
It's definitely possible. I've played around with Chat GPT, and I have a friend who's very, very tech savvy, and he is actually creating his own workshop, and he does training too, to how for teachers how to use this to kind of create almost like the Jarvis from Iron Man, right? This omnipresent thing that you can use, and
it's a tool. How do you same with
yeah.
I mean, I mean, Google Translate used to be a joke, but it's not a joke anymore.
Right.
It's pretty good, and you know, and DeepL is really good. It's not perfect, but I mean, I have a friend who teaches translation studies in Japan, and one thing she helps her students with is, how do you write in your native language in such a way that DeepL will translate it accurately? So that's a skill, right? If you were going to write something on a website such that an automatic translation, I mean, if I go to a website in Brazil, as I did not too long ago, and I want to know, will this distributor handle clients outside of Brazil? Well, I'm not going to spend 3 years learning Portuguese first, am I? I'm going to hit that button at the top that says translate to English. So I hit translate to English. maybe 3 prepositions are wrong. I don't care. I can read it. But whoever's writing that information in the first place, if someone could come in and say, oh, if you write it in this way, it will easily be translated not only into Spanish, but also into English and German. It will be a little harder in Chinese, but here are some things you could do anyway. So there's kind of new fields opening up that I think the translation tools and ChatGPT are going to bring us.
And that's what.
But I think before, at the same time that we get better at using them as really good tools, there's going to be some materials coming out that have never been looked at by a human,
that we need to kind of wade through. That was kind of one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because we see all of this material being printed. We see lots of things coming out, lots of people publishing things, and we think that it might serve a purpose. So do you have any, besides teachers really investing in their professional development and kind of doing the work, like training to be a teacher, really understanding class, is there anything else that you would recommend for people to kind of be able to look at books?
How to tell if something is good or bad?
Yeah.
I think,
because it's not always face value.
We joke in publishing about the sort of the 10-second flick test or the 30-second flick test. If you pick up a book and you sort of flick through it and you think, oh yeah, that looks pretty good.
But that doesn't really work.
I don't think that's long enough. I don't think that's long enough. If you really want to know if a textbook is any good for your class, you need to look at the first chapter. You need to look at the middle chapter. You need to look at an end chapter. And hopefully you can talk to somebody who can tell you, are these chapters progressive? Are skills reviewed? How are skills reviewed? Et cetera, et cetera. When they told me with my business book that we had to take the project, the kind of the continuous thread out of the project, and I said, but why? And they said, oh, because teachers might want to skip chapters. And I said, well, it's not that kind of book. It's for beginners. And if you skipped a chapter, you'd be missing some really important language, and you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be writing a business plan before you know the present tense. I mean, we've sequenced the units in a coherent way. And it's like, yeah, but sometimes teachers might want to just do unit 4 and not do unit 5. And it's like, well, then their class wouldn't be very good. How about explaining to teachers the advantages of not skipping a unit and making sure that every unit is good? If they're skipping a unit, why? Either they don't understand how the book is put together, or they don't know what to do with it. I mean, there's some problem if you have a sequential book and people are skipping units. Oh, if it's a book of, here's 15 low intermediate conversation topics, and it doesn't matter in what order you go through, then that's fine. But everybody at the publisher and on the writing team should know what kind of book it is, right? Is unit 10 going to be harder than unit 6? And if so, then you can't skip unit 7, 8, and 9, or you wouldn't get there. So.
Yeah, and some teachers, well, I would say that at least in my reality, some teachers don't really, they want to do things, they choose books that are inappropriate for their classes. And then what happens is they have to adapt and they have to choose and pick and choose. Well, because I have this student and they're trying to use a pre-service book to fill the needs of a an experienced worker, or maybe a salesperson or something like that. And so they're trying to extract things, and you really have to understand how the book functions first.
Right. And if they're just in a book that isn't right for them, you got to go for supplementary materials or write your own stuff. But that's where a lot of these sort of niche books for supplementing things for teachers and students come in. I still have in the back of my mind, I would love to do in my free time when I find enough authors, a book, a series, just like tiny little books per problematic grammar point. So we take the present perfect, but we do listening and writing and reading and really just hit it to death. And I would call it something like finally enough practice with the present perfect. Because you hit that in a textbook and you have, 4 pages, that's not enough if you come from a language that doesn't have that. Right. If you speak French or Portuguese or Spanish or something, it's not going to trip you up. But if you speak Chinese or Japanese or Korean or Arabic or languages that don't have the whole concept, then 2 days in class is not enough to really wrap your mind around it and what it does and how it's different from the past. And like I could a whole book on articles, a whole book on certain prepositions, a whole book on connectors. Why do we have a comma before and, but we need a semicolon before moreover? And that way, if you had a book moving at a certain pace and it's mostly good for your students, but they come up to count non-count nouns and they just can't wrap your brain around it, you could go to this resource book and you'd have some things to slow down your curriculum and bring extra stuff in. But
Do you think this is kind of where we're going? Because it seems as if teachers are already intuitively we're doing that now. We
yeah,
have kind
oh yeah,
of
yeah,
main materials that we use, whether it's a book or sometimes it's self-made materials. And then we are always searching for these little things that are kind of
yes,
popping up.
yes,
And
and,
that's
little supplementary things. Oh, sure, all the time. And I think teachers have always done that. I mean, even if you teach the same class at supposedly the same level out of the same textbook, every year your class is a little bit different. And one group is just going to not get this page, and the other group is going to sail through and wonder why you're moving so slowly. You're always adjusting for whoever's in front of you. And language changes and current events change and things that people use language for changes. And we need one change that I wanted to make in my writing books, and my writing skills haven't changed all that much, but I looked at my books and I thought it's like the internet didn't exist. There was sort of no mention of smartphones and texting and email and websites. There wasn't any information. I mean, we weren't talking about faxes or something or telexes, but it was something that's an important part of current culture was just not there. And they said, we don't need a unit about the internet, but we do need to integrate that reality into the book that people are holding. So it feels like it's from their life now, and they're not reading something from
it's
as
an
they were in
important
the
thing.
1990s. Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote a paper on that of computer mediated communication and did
Mm,
discourse analysis for it and saying this is a new genre. We have to
yes.
accommodate for
Yes.
these types of things and integrate them in because they're skills that we need. But
Yeah.
huge
We did a
publishers.
little graded reader for A1 level students, and I fight a bit with the typical ER people
You
about
are
word
feisty. You
lists
are feisty,
and
Dorothy.
I have my opinions about word lists and how rigid you can be. And so the whole context of the book was school, and not just elementary. So there's elementary school students, there's parent teacher conferences, there's a university student going to office hours. And I said, we need something online. So we have a little chapter called You're on Mute, which is this
That's
woman
so perfect.
on her first, and it's a book that's introducing long vowels. So mute is such a good long U, and it's very phonicsy. But we need the word computer, which of course is on a traditional word list, off list for that level. And my author is like, oh, can I not have the word computer? And I said, yes, you can have the word computer. I don't care what word list you're looking at. In 2022, because this was last year, people know the word computer. And if they don't know the word computer, they need to know the word computer. So we will, at the very lowest level, as an A1 beginning student, as you're learning your long and short vowels, you will need to learn the word computer, and you need the word internet, and you just need those words. And sometimes word lists don't quite keep pace with how language is changing. And I would argue that "you're on mute" is a very useful phrase these days. I heard it today. I have a book club that meets online just before we met to do this talk, and somebody had a question, and the presenter had to say, "Oh, John, you're still on mute." So that's natural language, but it's not in any books from 2 years ago because it wasn't common language 2 years ago.
And with the constant changes, I promise I won't keep you too long. But with the
Oh, that's I could talk all day,
no,
as you
I know
probably
it's great, but the constant changes. Do you think that publishers will be able to keep up with it? Because there is a whole process in creating these materials. It's not like it's 1 year we can just change everything. But do you think that maybe in the future, or perhaps this is
yeah,
even
yeah.
happening, they're starting to think, well, we could do like digital, which would keep up with trends, and then like a core book that would be really kind of reinforcing?
Well, there's the whole sort of publishing model of how a book is made. When Macmillan or Oxford or Cambridge, when they make a book, they have print runs and they choose, okay, all right, we'll make 25,000 copies of these books. And if you find a typo on page 34, it's regrettable, but you're not going to throw away 25,000 copies. You're going to keep the typos in a folder. And when those 25 copies are sold, you'll do a second printing and correct those typos. But when I do a book, because I can't afford print runs, and I'm also not going to, I can't put 25,000 books in my living room, or my husband is going to be very upset.
Divorce.
Exactly. So this is a print on demand model. I upload the files. When someone buys a book, the book is made. So if I find a typo, make sure my husband isn't listening. I have been known to see a typo at 11 p.m. and I go to bed, I just can't sleep. And I'll get up at 3 a.m. and come down, fix that typo, put the file through. But the typo is fixed in 24 hours. And so the next time somebody buys a paperback, that typo is not in it. So it's also, or if I find a web link that was certainly current at the time of publication, it's not working now, we can take it out. We can change it. So if publishing can move to a more print on demand, and for them, I mean, there are price factors that go into, I mean, a print run is cheaper. If you do something more expensive, does that raise the price for, you know, it's more complex than I know.
Sure.
But as an industry, if we could get together and figure out a way to lower prices. For years, I used to beg publishers, it was an idea of my co-editor, Maggie Sokolik. It's like, could we take the normal course book, you know, Interchange or Headway or English File or whatever you have, could we make a $5 version for Africa? Make it black and white, printed on thin, crappy paper or whatever, but give them a book they can afford. If you make it cheaper than photocopying, they will buy that book. And publishers will go, oh, yeah, that's very interesting. And I say, but you wouldn't even have to change the material. Just give them something they can afford. Can we bring the price down? And I think, I mean, things that are pirated tend to be more expensive things. There's a point where consumers feel that something is fair. And if it's fair, most people will pay for it. I mean, there are always dishonest people in the world, and that is beyond my ability to fix.
We can't change that.
But for people who are honest, if something is fair, they're likely to just pay you for that. If it's unfair, that's where they begin fighting back by not buying it or buying something different or protesting or something. So, I mean, in my cheap little ebooks, I have a page there that says, we're trying to bring you excellent materials very cheaply. For that reason, if somebody gave you this book, could you head over to our website and buy your own copy? As long as our authors make money, they will keep on making books. If they stop making money, they'll stop making books. So do you want to feed the machine that brings you these materials? If so, you know.
And it's not all about money. I mean, obviously we have to make money. It's a business model. But at the same time, it would be interesting if publishers moved in the direction, like a lot of the ideas that you're saying here is making me think, if they moved in the direction of having core, really strong, printed, they can do their big print runs, and then working with a more agile type of model, or even working with small publishers like yourself to provide these supplemental materials. So we have this book, and we have these recommendations from a partner publisher that if you need supplemental material, these things
this will fit in with it.
This will fit in with it. This is constantly updated, and do something along those lines. And there's a digital platform that gets updated, but there's also smaller
or there's this
fees.
Subscription model where teachers could contribute. If you contribute 3 resources, you get the bank of everybody else's resources. With those big course books, think how many teachers have made their own supplemental readings or exercises or worksheets that go with that course book, right? And that's gold. And it doesn't go with anybody else's course book. It'd be nice if you could have a library where they could share those somehow.
Because I think that would be something that teachers would be really interested in. The publishers are still making money. Smaller publishers like yourself are still able to
Hmm.
produce and pay your writers, pay your editors,
Yeah,
get everything. There's still money being exchanged, but also we're tending to the needs of the educators that actually this is what we need. We need
yeah,
options. We need to have things that are current. We need to have things that if we have to slow down with a students, or we have to move faster, we can kind of
yeah, yeah,
enrich them or reteach them. That's the idea. Dorothy,
yeah.
you have a lot of good ideas, my friend.
Tell the world, tell
Tell
the
them,
world.
it's gonna be on the internet.
Put it online, then they'll know. But I will say to anyone out there listening, if you have a great idea for a great book, or you want to write my little grammar series, I am open to great ideas. And
That's wonderful. Yeah, because I think that there's a lot of talented individuals. There's a lot of
yeah,
people who would be interested in doing things like that, that are trying to get into, publishing and writing
yeah,
materials. And it's certainly a kind of a booming interest here in Brazil
right.
that
And
people.
I keep meaning to take my self-publishing course and make it a self-access course, but I have to sit down and record everything.
Oh,
Every year I tell them I'm going to do that. Hasn't happened yet. It does still go live every summer. So I do. I think we went from 4 weeks, but I had to bump it up. So we're now a 5 week course where we meet online once a week and share materials and critique each other and whatnot. And so
and this course, sorry, it's a group or a course that you offer. You offer a course.
I offer it through ITDI, which is International Teacher Development Institute. I
Mm-hmm.
think so. Um, I'm not very good with
That's fine.
acronyms.
Well, you can send me the links and we'll put them in the show
Yeah,
notes
yeah,
so
yeah,
people
yeah.
can in.
And I haven't quite chosen dates for this summer, but we usually do June or July, and
Mm-hmm.
it goes 5 weeks. And I mean, and you get recordings and a forum, and you can contact me for the year after that to
Excellent.
finish your book, because sometimes 5 weeks isn't quite enough to finish a book if you've got other things going on in your life.
And what
But
type of so it's for people who are interested in self
in
publishing?
self-publishing,
Okay.
yes. And we call it self-publishing for ELT professionals. Occasionally we've had people do, somebody did a children's book, um, somebody did a recipe book. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't say no if you had a non-ELT book.
Okay.
Keith Foles, who's one of my ELT authors, he took the course and did a book on how to successfully see the Northern Lights. But he's already written 50 ELT textbooks. He's
He was
he's
he was
entitled. He's
experimenting.
entitled to
Yeah.
write about the Northern Lights now if he wants to. So you could do other kinds of books, but it's focused for on classroom materials for students or professional development
Okay.
for teachers.
Interesting, very interesting. So we'll link that, and then of course everybody can find your website.
Yep.
We'll
Yep.
link that too. And any, it always sounds weird. Any last words? Any last golden nuggets of people who are interested? Because this is
Yeah.
publishing is kind of something that's inaccessible if you're not in the area. So it's sometimes hard to get
Well,
into. And
it used to be inaccessible,
mm,
not inaccessible anymore, because now that anybody could do it. I would say the most successful publishers are not people who want to be published. They're people who have an idea that they want to get out there.
okay,
And there are people who first decide, I would like to be an author, and then they look around and they think, what can I write? And some of those people are still successful. You can certainly do it that way. But the easiest way is to say, you know, I have a fantastic way of teaching medical English for medical students and nursing students. There's nothing out there like that. I wish my materials could be available because I know other teachers besides me could use those. And you go after, I want my ideas to get out there. And I think that makes the best book. So, something you care about.
yeah. Passion always kind of comes through on the pages. We
Yeah,
we can see
yeah,
it.
I think so. I think it does. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you very much because we've sat for quite a while and you've given us such great anecdotes and stories, and you are just so welcome to come back and talk about anything that you want.
Oh,
Yes.
wonderful. Have me back to talk about graded readers.
Oh, okay. Yes, we can definitely do that. And I do want to, because you will be presenting we also have a similar connection. You'll be presenting at EduFest
Oh yeah.
what month are you?
Well, there's something online in March,
Yes.
which is like a 1 hour. And actually, I'm going to do sort of a revised version of that talk of can you / should you teach English if you are not fluent?
Perfect. That's a
So if you want
fantastic talk.
that
Yes.
talk again, I'll be giving that again. And then in Athens, in Greece, in August,
August,
I
yeah.
have a plenary and also a workshop.
Amazing.
So
Okay, so if anybody wants to kind of find you floating around, you'll be
yes,
online,
yes.
you'll be in
I'm at
Athens.
TESL in the US in March. I'm at IATEFL in the UK in April.
Find her.
So here and there.
Here, there, and everywhere. Well, it was wonderful talking with you. Thank you so much again. And you'll definitely can, if you want to talk about graded readers, I'm up for it.
Yay, yay.
Okay, well, thanks everyone, and we'll see everyone later.
Okay, bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. Want to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT and send me a message. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube or Spotify channel to stay up to date, and of course, take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.